Balakrev is one of the less famous members of the Russian mighty handful of composers who were aiming to introduce nationalism in Russian music. Anyone familiar with his symphonic work would probably wonder why that's the case. It features typically appealing Russian melodies and orchestration similar to Rimsky-Korsakov's or Borodin's symphonies. There is an excellent performance by the Russian State Symphony Orchestra on Naxos. Though it has not been as well received as his concertos for piano or violin, the cello concerto is quite similar to those other works. It utilizes captivating Armenian melodies and lush orchestration. It is somewhat a mystery why Soviet authorities didn't like the work and encouraged them to denounce the composer in the infamous Sednov decree. The concerto is quite accessible and should be performed more often. Bruckner and Mahler are often compared to each other as they both wrote gargantuan symphonies, but unlike Mahler, Bruckner's early symphonies don't get the love they deserve. This work has one of Bruckner's more accessible introductions, as it immediately catches the listener's attention with a gorgeous melody. The influence of Schubert is apparent throughout the work. Sadko is a symphonic poem, an early one from Russia. It, not unlike the composer Scheherazade, has the sea as a major characteristic in the music. Rimsky-Korsakov revised the work later in his career and even followed it up with a full-scale opera of the same name that borrows musical ideas from the piece. Any fan of the various playful fairy tale music that is common in classical music should get to know this work. Prokofiev's music for children is quite famous, such as the work Peter and the Wolf. These short piano works are just as engaging as that beloved composition. The highlight here is the third piece, which displays the composer's knack for melodies that can be sarcastic and unusual, but still appealing to the listener. Everybody knows Clair de Lune, but there is a great wealth of material for piano by Debussy that is equally memorable. This piece is actually for 4 hands and has been orchestrated. Both versions are enjoyable in their own way. Debussy's music can vary in its levels of accessibility. The Petite Suite is a good example to show someone who thinks the composer as being dull or too modern for them. Brahms's major key works sometimes don't get the attention they deserve. While the G minor piano quartet is pretty famous, this piece isn't as frequently performed. I actually prefer it, as it shows off Brahms's impressive use of unique melodies. Much has been written about the influence of Schubert on this work, and the quartet truly ranks alongside that composer's best works. Sure, his piano concerto and music for Peer Gynt are more famous, but a case can be made that the string quartet is Grieg's finest work. The piece grips you from the beginning with an impressive introduction. Grieg's gift for lyricism is apparent throughout the work. It has been suggested by some that the piece even influenced Debussy's string quartet, a surprise since the composer was not a big fan of Grieg. Duruflé's output is similar to Albanberg's in that it is small, but everything is essential. His music combines Gregorian chant with modern harmonies. He was an organ virtuoso, and that quality shows up in the difficulty of his compositions for the instrument. In this piece, the highlight is the slow second movement. It might strike the listener as otherworldly. It serves as a good introduction to Duruflé's instrumental work and will encourage the listener to seek out the rest of his compositions. Alkan's time will come. Due to his reclusive nature and stiff competition from other great composers for piano like Chopin and Liszt, he fell into obscurity. The Concerto for Solo Piano is his masterwork and one of the longest pieces for piano. It takes almost an hour to perform. The pianist is required to play the part of both orchestra and soloist. The first thing most notice about Alkan's music upon first hearing is how note-filled it is. It must be daunting for a pianist to take on the work. It is known that Liszt once claimed to actually feel nervous about performing when knowing that Alkan was in the audience. His music must be heard more often.